All right, today we are breaking down a really fascinating document. It basically tells an investment story, a hypothetical one, about one person, a super simple daily habit, and some truly eye-popping numbers. So let's get into it and unpack the strategy it lays out. At the very heart of this thing is a pretty powerful question. It's asking if a small, consistent action, like something as simple as putting aside $5 a day, could actually lead to some serious wealth. It's a really compelling idea, so let's see how this story plays out. Okay, before we go any further, and this is super important, the document itself has a big, bold disclaimer right up front. It makes it crystal clear that this is just a hypothetical scenario to illustrate a point. It is not financial advice. So with that in mind, let's meet the main character of this little story.
So the document introduces us to this guy named Bob, and this entire scenario, the whole thing, is built around one single, simple action that he takes every single day.
Here's the setup. The story kicks off on a specific date in the future, April 1st, 2025. And Bob's commitment is just so straightforward, $5 a day. We're not talking about a huge lump sum, just a small, totally manageable daily amount. But the real question is, what exactly does Bob do with that $5?
So this is the core of the strategy, and it's basically a two-part deal. First, 3 of those $5 are used to just buy and hold a token called APTM. Simple enough. But the other $2 are put to work. They're added to what's called a liquidity pool. You can think of that as just a big pot of tokens that lets other people trade. And to do that, Bob pairs $1 of his new APTM with $1 of a stablecoin, WUSDT. The whole point of doing this is usually to earn fees from all those trades. So this two-pronged approach, holding some and using the rest to provide liquidity, is pretty much the engine for this entire scenario.
Okay, now we get to the really interesting part, right? The results. The document maps out what supposedly happens to Bob's investment over time based on its own projections and, of course, some hypothetical token price increases. Let's take a look at the key milestones.
So the source projects the outcome at 3 major checkpoints, the 1-year mark, the 3-year mark, and then all the way out to 5 years. Let's see how this daily $5 action supposedly compounds, starting with year 1.
All right, so after a full year of putting in $5 a day in and day out, Bob's total out-of-pocket investment adds up to $1,800. That's a pretty respectable amount for sure. But what does the document project this is actually worth now?
Get this, the projection after just 1 year is almost $36,000. I mean, in this scenario, that's a nearly 20x return. Now that number does hinge on the APTM token price hypothetically rising to $25. That's a huge leap. So what happens if he keeps this going? Let's fast forward now to the 3-year mark. Bob has stayed the course, he's been consistent, and his total investment has now hit $5,400. So the big question is, what does that investment look like now? And boom, after 3 years, the projected value just skyrockets to over $173,000. Now, this assumes the token's price has climbed to $40. You can really start to see the powerful compounding effect this document is trying to illustrate here. But the story isn't over yet.
Okay, we've now hit the final checkpoint. 5 years in, Bob's total personal investment is now $9,000. He's been patient, he's been disciplined, and now we get to see the final projected outcome of his whole 5-year journey.
An incredible $432,000. That is the final number, based on the token hitting a hypothetical $60 price. The growth from an initial $9,000 is just staggering. So let's try to put that into perspective a bit. And wow, this chart just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you see that little bar representing the total money Bob actually put in, $9 grand. And on the right, you've got this towering bar of the projected value, $432,000. Visually, the contrast is just immense. So what's the document's big explanation for this hypothetical success?
So the document argues that these incredible hypothetical results, they aren't about getting lucky or trying to time the market. Instead, it really boils Bob's success in this story down to one core principle.
And there it is. That's really the thesis of the entire document. The story of Bob is presented as a victory of character. It wasn't about being some kind of investment genius. It was about the simple, repeated habits of being consistent, being patient, and being disciplined.
The document doesn't end with a nice little summary or a neat conclusion. Instead, it actually ends by turning the story of Bob back on the reader, framing it as a choice, and it poses this direct, really provocative question. And that is the final thought this document leaves us with. It presents this entire case study, this whole hypothetical journey, and then it just asks you, what are you going to do with this story? It's a pretty powerful ending, and it's definitely designed to make you think about the potential of small, consistent actions in your own life.